And I'm hoping it will be third time lucky for my amendment of the Constitution, Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Bill. We debated it first in the 31st Dáil in May 2015, then in the 32nd Dáil in March 2017, and now in the 33rd Dáil today. Why do I keep resubmitting this bill for debate? Because of its importance for our human rights. Because of the constitutional protections we would have to have a right to adequate housing, to join a trade union of our choice, to health and mental health, to participate in culture and benefit from scientific progression. All very important human rights, but even more so in the shadow of COVID-19. I keep resubmitting this bill in the hope of some light bulb moment that the majority of TDs would realise that it is right to do the right thing. Because we signed up to the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights in 1973. Ratified it in 1989 and have done nothing on it since. Because the previous government set up a constitutional convention and in its final meeting on February 2013 it discussed this exact issue and 85% of members voted in favour of amending the constitution for inclusion of these rights to be realised progressively and within available resources. Actually, I'm not naive enough to think that the government will accept the important human rights bill this time round. To think that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael would accept a bill that would mean legislation would be based on human rights, that's laughable, I know. I've heard all the arguments against accepting the bill over the years, and still none of them stack up. If anything, this past year of unprecedented times in a global pandemic has shown us that this bill is more than ever important. Over the years, most of the opposition parties and groupings have spoken in support of the bill and voted for it. I note also that in the 32nd Dáil, when the Green Party were in opposition benches, Ministers Eamon Ryan and Catherine Martin supported this bill. Does this mean that the Green Party will ensure that the government will accept the bill? That you will all support it at this time round? What arguments could you possibly have against it, though you have changed your tune regarding CETA and seem to be hemorrhaging members? In fairness though, the Labour Party originally introduced this bill back in the 2000s and then again in 2012. But by the time they were in government in the 31st Dáil and I attempted to bring it forward, they had found reasons to vote against it. I note that here on opposition benches they have returned to their original policy stance. And it's amazing when you see how policies and priorities change once a party gets into government. The Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Initiative was a coalition of over 60 civil society organisations that supported strengthening the protection of economic, social and cultural rights in the Irish Constitution. More than 60 organisations including Amnesty International, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, the Children's Rights Alliance, the Irish Council for Civil Liberties and many others. In 2017, the ESCR initiative held a conference in the Mansion House in Dublin entitled Making Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Meaningful. The event brought together a range of stakeholders to discuss how enforceable ESC rights such as housing and health would impact on individuals and groups in Ireland. Drawing on experiences from other states where ESC rights have been given legal protection, imagine that, legal protection. There was so much momentum and goodwill behind this important campaign. However, in preparation for this morning, I made contact with some of those civil society organisations and also with Mr Aidan Lloyd, who is so integral to the initiative. To my dismay, Mr Lloyd told me that they wound up the ESCR initiative a few years ago, as it was clear that the government had no intention of implementing the recommendation of the Convention on the Constitution. Mr Lloyd went on to say that prior to winding up, we had spoken with the ICCL about taking on the brief, but they are already operating with meagre resources to fulfil their civil and political rights objectives. Based on his years of campaigning, Mr Lloyd said, "I think there is good support among some politicians and civil society groups for ESC rights to be written into the Constitution, but unfortunately, without resources, it was impossible for us to continue as an advocacy group." It is such a pity to see dedicated and active campaigners and organisers become so despondent with government policy that they cannot continue their fight. You will say that some of the things you brought about included the referendum on marriage equality, but that was people power, Minister. That was public readiness and willingness for that campaign. That was the people sharing their stories and mobilising in their communities. You will also say that you made history when you declared that members of the travelling community were an ethnic minority. Well, don't even get me started on how this and previous governments have and do let down members of the travelling community in the most heinous ways. Amnesty Ireland still has a very informative section on their website relating to the campaign for economic, social and cultural rights, which have been funded through Atlantic Philanthropies. Amnesty's website states, "We are working to strengthen the protection of economic, social and cultural rights, like the rights to health, housing and to an adequate standard of living in Ireland. By putting ESC rights into Irish law, the government would begin guaranteeing everyone in Ireland a life of dignity to the extent that our resources allow. It would mean decisions made by government must contribute to the delivery of those rights. This includes a guarantee that every single one of us can access, at the very least, an adequate standard of living. There is also a very useful FAQ and other resources, information that can be used to myth-bust against your fallacious claims about separation of powers with the judiciary and that the Oireachtas would lose powers of taxation legislation. I have been in touch with Amnesty, ICCL and the EAPN and others because in non-COVID times we would have held a press conference and a photo call and tried to raise a profile of the importance of this bill. Some of the important reasons why I feel so strongly about the need for this bill are as follows. When the Troika went to Poland or Portugal, they weren't able to destroy their public housing system because of their constitutional protection, and we need that here. The right to join a union should not be left to the whim of a political class that has always danced to the tune of big business. The Constitutional Convention scrutinised this provision. 85% of members, ordinary everyday people, agreed these rights need constitutional protection. Why have governments failed to act on the will of the people? It is the people's constitution after all. This bill will be an anchor for the rights to housing, health and education to be provided for on the basis of need at all times. It would give Irish citizens a strengthened right to hold the government to account for how the state manages their affairs, putting the people of Ireland at the centre of government. The right to a home is fundamental to happiness. It's the foundation for so much else in society, as it gives people a stability to plan and participate in an active, positive life. And the separation of powers argument does not hold water. Over 11 countries, including such radical places as Germany, Portugal and Finland, have these rights protected in their constitutions, so why can't we do it here? We as a nation are renowned for our contribution to music and the arts. Being able to enjoy this is an important part of a fulfilling life. It should not be the preserve of the rich only. Everyone should have the right to take part and enjoy cultural life. COVID-19 has brought devastation to our island and to the world. It has given us an opportunity. As you know, I believe that we need to follow a zero-COVID strategy and use that time to plan and reset. The Constitution is used as a barrier for much progressive legislation by Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, but in March of last year we saw a different type of government. The pandemic and global crisis showed that steps could be taken for the majority and not just a few. Evictions were stopped, rents were frozen, private hospitals were taken into the public service. There was newfound association for the frontline workers in our supermarkets, food delivery services, as well as, of course, the eye-watering demands on the health service. Communities came together. We were told we were all in this together, and people believed it, until the government faltered. While government formation of the Grand Coalition took place, it actually led to the falling apart of the governing of our country. Egos got in the way of public good, personalities wanted to be the fore to make announcements, and some went off to Clifton to celebrate the lockdown with golf and a dinner. The difference in the elite classes and the one rule for them and another for us started to grate. Residents in nursing homes died as the virus spread so quickly. Residents in direct provision were also left behind. Workers in meat factories were made to work, which led to COVID-19 outbreaks. And it is happening again now. Even regarding the property rights in the Constitution, they are constantly used and regurgitated as reasons why we can't have an effective solution to the housing crisis. But yet you will try to say that we don't need a right to housing in the Constitution because you should trust the government to provide legislative measures to make sure that there is sufficient and affordable housing. The housing and homeless crisis is literally of your government's making. It is this and previous governments' fault that there are thousands of children being forced to experience homelessness. That people have died by suicide because of their housing situations, never mind the inability to access timely mental health support. It is this and previous governments' fault that more homeless people have died on our streets in the past year than in many other years. This crisis and these tragedies are of your making. And then you ask the opposition and the public to trust you, that we don't need constitutional protection, that you look after us all. You only look after the rich and the landlord classes, the REITs and those who profiteer from this basic human right. The right to shelter, to an adequate place to live, to a home. RT investigates last week an issue which some of my colleagues have been raising here consistently, and that is the difference. And that is why I'll talk about it later, but I won't be accepting the amendment that the government has put forward to this either, because I don't think it is well meant. Thank you.